This is TWiT.
I am excited to talk to our next guest who is here to give us an update on where things stand when it comes to TikTok. From The Information, it's Kaya Yuriev. Welcome to the show, Kaya.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. I was hoping that you could kind of start by giving the listeners a bit of a refresher on the current state of the TikTok ban. Why is the app facing a ban in the US, and for how long has this whole thing been underway?
Yes. I mean, it's crazy. I've been covering this story for 4 years. So this is really the crunch time of the story. But the app is facing a ban due to national security concerns. So the worry from lawmakers is that TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance could put sensitive user data into the hands of the Chinese government. So location data, information about American users. And there's also concern that China could use TikTok to spread misinformation or manipulate American users. I think what the magic of TikTok has been is that you open the app and it just serves you a feed of videos that it thinks you will like. And it's really a passive experience where you're not really following creators. So there is this concern that because of the way TikTok is structured, it would be very easy to manipulate the recommendations. TikTok has long denied allegations that China can access the data or that it's ever, used TikTok in this manner. But the concern is there and the potential for that is there. This all really goes back to 2020 when Donald Trump was in his first presidency. And he kicked all this off by trying to ban it through an executive order in 2020. Then you fast forward, it goes sort of through the courts. Biden gets elected. He revokes that executive order, but he signs a new order requiring the Commerce Department to review foreign-owned apps that pose security risks. So even with the presidential transition, TikTok was always, this threat was always hanging over them. But then you fast forward to March of this year, and there is a very popular bill that basically requires TikTok to divest from ByteDance or face a ban. And that passes, with widespread bipartisan support. And Biden signed it into law in April, and the deadline is Sunday now.
Wow. See, thank you so much for providing that, because it was a multi-year, presidency situation, and the way that it changed from piece to piece, from starting out as an executive order to going to, the Commerce Department looking into it. There's been a lot, and there's been a lot of conversation around sort of the reasons behind why it's taking place and the national security concerns. So it's really good, I think, to have that. Now, part of this, of course, was the opportunity for TikTok to divest its U.S. portion of the company. I know that this wasn't part of the original question, but I guess I'm just kind of... Did TikTok give that the old college try? Did ByteDance rather look at all into selling it? Was that any part of this process over the last 4 or 5 years?
So ByteDance has been very resistant to sell, and throughout this process, they publicly said that they are not interested in selling TikTok. China has very strict export laws, which would require Beijing to sign off on any sort of acquisition because of TikTok's powerful recommendation algorithm. So it's always felt like a sale has been sort of a non-starter. Even in 2020, we saw, Oracle, Walmart, all these companies try to make an investment in TikTok to sort of change the ownership structure. We try, Walmart was going to acquire them at one point in 2020, but you really have not heard much about a sale at all throughout this process. So it hasn't seemed like it's been on the table at all or something ByteDance has considered.
Got it. Now, you have reported that TikTok is looking at planning to shut down the app. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that and how that differs from what the law technically requires, and the implication for existing users who already have the app installed on their device.
Yeah, so I think the assumption everyone had was that existing users would still be able to access TikTok after the deadline, and that slowly, basically, TikTok would be prevented from shipping updates, security features, and that eventually the app would sort of be rendered useless. But what we reported on Tuesday is that TikTok is actually planning to shut off the app. So the plan is on Sunday, barring any sort of government intervention from the Supreme Court or Biden, which is looking very unlikely at this point, existing users will open TikTok's app and see a pop-up that will direct them to a website with information about the ban. So they will not actually be able to scroll TikTok. They will not be able to see their profile. They will not be able to watch videos. So that's very different from what people were expecting. But the law actually requires TikTok service providers to cut off service. So that doesn't just include the app stores, but also cloud providers like Oracle. So my understanding is that TikTok is deciding to shut down to protect those service providers from legal liability. But it will also have, the immediate effect of angering TikTok's user base all at once and really bringing the reality of the ban home instead of this sort of slow burn of the app becoming, non-functional over time.
Absolutely. What steps do we know has TikTok taken to prepare for the shutdown? And I think more importantly, it's got U.S. employees, it's got U.S. users. I remember when the company put out a notification letting people know that the shutdown was imminent, and it really seemed to spark some activity on the platform. Are we looking at the same situation this time? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the way that the platform itself, the people on the platform have looked at alternatives to TikTok should the ban come through.
Yeah, so before the bill passed, they really tried to energize the user base. They sent push notifications to TikTok users actually in very specific parts of the country to try to flip senators and House members. So that was before the bill even passed. But it's been really interesting because we've been reporting on this story for months, and it's been fascinating to see TikTok actually just totally operate business as usual. They have been very focused on the legal fight and challenging the law. And they've said, that they feel very confident. They know this will go to the Supreme Court. Now that the Supreme Court oral arguments happened, you're not hearing as much kind of confidence from TikTok. But, as recently as earlier this month, TikTok sent executives to CES, the major tech conference in Las Vegas. They gave a panel on 2025 trends. They were talking about the impact of TikTok. So if you were sitting in that room, you would not think the app is getting banned. So they have really been pushing ahead. They've been shipping features. They were pushing TikTok Shop during the holiday season. So they really have almost been ignoring the reality of the ban. I mean, obviously their legal team is working on it, but for the rank and file employees, they were still, forging ahead on their goals and shipping features. But this week, employees finally heard internally from the company. They sent a memo to staff indicating that their jobs would be safe. The law doesn't require the company to shut its offices in the US. So they said, they indicated their jobs would be safe, but at the same time, longer term, you could expect layoffs, but I think they are still hoping that they could broker some sort of deal with the Trump administration. But for now, they sort of reassured employees that there would be no change to their benefits and roles, and their offices would continue operating next week.
Interesting. Now, you talked a little bit about kind of the history of things and how TikTok has and ByteDance have moved through this process. What did the company argue at the recent Supreme Court hearing, and why is it that the company believes this ban violates the First Amendment? I know this is a really complicated question, and so I'm telling everyone out there, we're not going to go into the pedantry area, listeners.
Yes.
Thank you. You're giving us a brief kind of broad overview of their argument, of its argument, and not, of course, personal opinions being involved here. So
yes,
I've laid those grounds.
I'm not a lawyer also, I will preface that, but I have spent a lot of time over the past few months speaking to lawyers and legal experts. I was actually at the Supreme Court. I was in the room for the oral arguments, so I got to hear them live. I was there. And I was at the oral arguments in the appeals court as well. They lost in the appeals court, and it was a very similar message from TikTok's lawyers. They have a parallel suit actually from both TikTok and creators of TikTok. So they have, those two suits that have a very similar message of, TikTok is a U.S. company operating in the U.S., so it should have First Amendment protections. And for the TikTok creator suit, they're saying that creators should have the right to publish on the platform of their choice. And they tried to make this argument of Spotify is a Swedish company, but artists who are American can publish on that platform. It was interesting in the previous oral arguments with the appeals court, the judges were really not having that argument and were like, yeah, but Sweden is not an adversary of the US in the same way that China is, right? So they didn't really like that Spotify comparison. You didn't hear that level of skepticism from the Supreme Court justices, but there was a lot of skepticism about the freedom of speech piece because the justices were sort of signaling, yes, but you have an option to keep TikTok alive. You're just choosing not to sell it. So that's sort of where the justices, you could see there was some skepticism there. Mm-hmm. But, they emphasize, TikTok has 170 million US users. You're stifling their freedom of expression. Other platforms are not the same as TikTok. And basically saying that, American users and creators and businesses should have the right to post on TikTok.
Understood. Now, I was hoping that to kind of round things out, you could help outline the potential paths forward for TikTok, including the possibility of a sale or other ways that the company could comply with the law, or maybe the law could be affected itself.
Yes. So, like I said, I think a sale is very unlikely. ByteDance has really said that throughout this process that they're not going to sell. There's the question of Trump, right? He will take office a day after the deadline. There was reporting yesterday from the Washington Post that he is mulling, options to save the app, including an executive order once he's president that would suspend the enforcement of the ban for 60 to 90 days. I mean, that is, I think, quite unlikely. I mean, the precedent that was set is that any president can come in and just knock out any law they don't agree with, right? So it's not likely to pass muster is sort of what legal experts have said. But, there's also this possibility that Trump could, tell his new attorney general to not enforce the law. But that really is up to the service providers. Are Apple, Google, and Oracle going to risk these hefty fines? Like, what assurances are they going to need from the Trump administration to feel comfortable doing that? Because they're still breaking a law. It is a law. There could be concerns from their general counsel that they could retroactively be fined. I mean, these are enormous fines for anyone downloading TikTok that the companies have to incur. Again, TikTok is not incurring this, it's their service providers. So I think the piece of the bill that gives the most wiggle room is actually the piece on the qualified divestiture. So everyone has been focusing sort of on this 90-day extension, which the president has the ability to give. But what's interesting is the 90-day extension actually has much stricter language that they have to really prove that a divestiture is in progress. And that includes binding legal documents, and again, like a sale, there's no evidence that there's any sort of sale happening. And for that to happen, between now and Sunday just seems crazy. But so an extension actually has a very big barrier for a president unless there's actually a sale happening. But the piece on the actual qualified divestiture actually gives a lot more wiggle room to the president, which at the time will be Trump now, to sort of give the president a lot of discretion to prove something like that has occurred. So there is some gray area in the law that perhaps Trump and TikTok will be able to broker some sort of agreement. But, it's interesting that even Trump is trying to mull what he can do because he's indicated that he wants to save the app. So, there are some paths. I mean, the easiest one is for them to sell, high level, but that the lawyer during the oral arguments explained how complicated that is because it's ByteDance technology. They have global engineers. It's very hard to just cut TikTok off from the rest of their global operations. So he was saying the complexity of the sale is very complicated. But high level, if you think about it, they could sell and avoid a ban, but that's not the likely path.
Wow. There's so much that's involved with this, and we're going to continue, of course, seeing how this all plays out. I'm sure you have been keeping an eye on everything as you're, pulling everything apart and understanding it. I want to thank you so much for taking time to join us today to give us this overview. If people would like to follow along with the work that you're doing in regard to this and other things, where is a good place for them to go to do that?
Yes, they can follow me on X, on LinkedIn, and I have a newsletter as well called Creator Economy, which is available on theinformation.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time today to join us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.